Hello and welcome. I call to order this March 24th, 2021 meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Josh Levy?
Here.
Barry Kaufman?
Here.
John Connolly? John, you're on mute.
He's frozen.
John?
Oh, there he is.
Rick Lunetta?
Yes.
Dick Riley?
Yes.
Jim Healy?
Yes.
Louise Miller is not here yet, and staff member Louise Misgard.
Yes.
I'm here too, Carol.
Oh. I called your name, didn't I?
Maybe, but I didn't hear it. You called John like 6 times, but I didn't get it.
Tom, Jacob, and thank you for coming. Good evening. This open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we've been advised and directed to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as a reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law, except for the agenda item entitled Citizens Request to Address the Finance Committee. This meeting will not feature public comment. This meeting will be conducted over Zoom and recorded, and some attendees are participating by video conference. All supporting materials have been provided members of this body and will be available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. We are turning to the first item on the agenda, and as a first order of business, I would ask for a motion that this meeting will be continued in the event of an interruption or a technical difficulty. The meeting will be continued at our next meeting of March 31st, 2021. Is there such a motion?
Second.
Great. All in favor? Dick?
Aye.
Rick?
Aye.
Josh?
Yes.
Tom?
Aye.
Barry?
Aye.
Jim?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Louise?
Yes.
Great. So the first item on the agenda is any citizen requests to address the Finance Committee. And Dave, will you make sure to let any citizens into the meeting, please?
I will. I am not seeing anybody raising their hand, so I think you can proceed.
Okay, very good. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of March 3rd, 2021 and March 17, 2021 open session. Have you all had the opportunity to review the minutes?
Have I moved their approval?
Thank you.
Second.
Great. Roll call vote. Rick?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Louise?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So minutes are approved. Thank you. Next item on agenda is a consultation with the Community Reservation Committee.
Oh, Madam Chair, I will bring in Mr. Pingatore and he'll tell us who else he wants to join him.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Good evening. Dave, can we bring in Artie Crocker, who is the vice chair of the CPC, and also Rick Zimbone, who is for lack of a better term, my wingman on financial matters. But he's, and also kind of heading up this working group with respect to the community housing restricted funds financing issue, which I think we'll have a robust discussion regarding.
You're thinking of Rich. You're thinking of Rich, Peter.
What's that?
You're thinking of was it Rich? I
Rick,
wasn't. Yeah,
no,
Rick,
Rick Zimbone.
I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't heading up. I thought you were mentioning I was heading up.
Okay, Rick Zimbone. Okay, and so good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, let's see. In anticipation of this consultation, I had forwarded to you 4 documents. I just want to make sure you have them, which is a February 19th letter from CPC, or me as chair of CPC, to the select board and copying the finance committee. And that's really addresses what we've been calling a sense of the committee with respect to Emory. And then a more complete memo addressing all of the current applications under review, also providing a sense of the committee to the select board. And I had submitted that to the select board in connection or in anticipation of my consultation with them. There should also be a PowerPoint presentation put together by the working group addressing the issue of the community housing reserve fund financing issue.
Hello.
And the 4th would be an update memo, which actually I was glad to actually have updates, because my purpose in bringing a lot of these issues forward as we did was to facilitate some discussion and some decisions a little bit earlier, so that everybody's expectations or whatever decisions were made would be made well in advance of town meeting, or well in advance of town meeting, so that things could be adjusted and we could have a coherent discussion about some things that I thought were just kind of, or we thought were just kind of hanging out there, if you will. So I have some update information, and that's in a short memo, and that's dated March 22nd, 2021. So you should have that packet of information in front of you, or and it's pretty. I kept it kind of succinct, if you will. I've tried different things in different years, and we'll see how well this one goes. Okay, so and what I was going to propose to do is quickly run through the 8 CPC applications that are before us, and then kind of finish with the finance article, which actually has the community housing reserve fund bucket issue embedded in it. And if that makes sense to you, Madam Chair, I will proceed.
Peter, that makes sense. And did you want to start with Emory Grover, or?
Yeah, let's start with Emory Grover's 01. And they're not marked sequentially in terms of priority. It's just first in time, first in right. So they were the first one in the door. And so it's 01. And so that one, I'll summarize it. And then what I would propose is we'll just take each one and then we'll have a discussion about it, because there are a lot of them that we're just probably going to blow right through, but there are some that are going to require a substantial discussion. Okay. So 01 is the Emory Grover Renovation and Addition project. The application is for design funds in the amount of $1,475,000, which is actually the full cost of the pre-bid design costs. There are some additional design costs that are kind of built into the construction aspect of it. There are some additional funds there, but this is the pre-bid design costs, and it's for the Emory Grover Renovation and Addition, known as Option 3 Rotated. If the design funds are approved, we anticipated that the public schools will be in front of us in '23 for CPC construction funding, and the approximate amount of $11 million. The total of the two applications, the total request was $12.6 million. And what they've, just to be in fairness to the proponents, which is they've done their analysis, and their position is based on our analysis and the architect, and we think that $12.6 million total of this project can be financed by CPC. But it does represent, we've been talking about the number 50%. It's not quite 50% because the total project cost is something like $27 million. That kind of information actually is pretty succinctly laid out on the first page of 01, first page of their application, okay? So based on that information, we looked at financial models. We started actually by looking at our financial projections dated 2/22 of 20, and it showed that if we had funded what was then, I think, an $11 million request total, not just 12.6 total, that there would be years in 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, where after we paid off our bond applications and put funds into our designated, our obligations, our reserve accounts, that there were some years where we would have, and not including the state match, so hang with me on that, so not including the state match, so just take the 2% property tax surcharge, collect those funds, distribute them as obligated to the reserve accounts, pay off the bond funds, the bond obligations for that town hall, the pool, and then the anticipated obligations for Emory Grover. We would end up with some years no money, no additional money, and then kind of growing into hundreds of thousands, and then $500,000, et cetera. So basically those three bond obligations were going to significantly eat up what cash was coming in from the property tax, from the property surcharge. And so now what we have, though, is a different model. Just bear with me, because if you may. Our latest projection was dated September 14th, 2020. And this was built on a model where we anticipated a 12.6 obligation. I think the numbers we got, we had updated numbers in terms of revenue, but and with that, we had years 2026 where, just as an example, and you can read this yourself, unused allowance would be roughly 1.5 million. Our obligation to, after we paid off our bonds to Rosemary and Town Hall, Emory Grover, 1.469. So we're kind of confronted with similar situation, but maybe just kind of 1 year out. So with that, we needed to put a stake in the ground, and we needed to build a financial model that we thought would provide us with the headroom that we needed to meet obligations other than these bond obligations, and the reserve account obligations. And so based on kind of a sense of the committee, we asked our finance director to build out a model where we had a total of a $6 million obligation to Emory Grover. And what we see in that is the latest financial model that we have, that's dated March 15th, 2021. And just by way of example, in year 2025, we would have an unused allowance, again, after paying our bond obligations on Town Hall, the pool, and our restricted funds, we would have an unused allowance of 1.4 million, Emory Grover obligation, $700,000. Next year, unused allowance of 1.5 million, Emory Grover obligation, $700,000. And the following year of that, this is 2027, unused allowance 1.6 million, Emory Grover obligation $670,000. So significantly more headroom there. One other caveat on this model, okay, just is that we built in the assumption that over the next 5 years, the reserve account for community housing would be doubled from 11% to 22%. Just trying to build, you know, it's a working model. Where would we be if we made these additional reserve account appropriations to community housing? Where would we be if we capped our obligation to Emory Grover at $6 million? And where would we be if we had these, and we also had our first tier obligations that were kind of in there through our town manager. And I think actually, I'm speaking a little off the cuff here because I'm not, you guys are the experts on this stuff. So I think that we were able to quickly see that some projects we were able to move up a couple of projects up to that were kind of hanging in the wings, but we were able to move them up in this projection under this model to kind of a tier 1 obligation. I think I've got that right. Well, so that's kind of that's kind of the information that informed us when we made the determination that we don't think we can do this, and let's look at it from a different perspective. It was intended, you know, the sense of the committee with respect to that was intended to facilitate a discussion. And I guess that's it. Well, I should add, the committee is supportive of preserving the building. I mean, you know, we got to think about what our charge is. This is a building that's on the National Historic Registry. That one of our charges is to preserve historic artifacts of the town and to find a way to do that. And so we're supportive of the project and looking for a way to preserve the building. But we're looking at a way to do it so that we're meeting our other obligations as well. I guess questions, comments?
So what's questions? Josh?
Thanks, Peter. So just my understanding is that, and this isn't about the merits of the decision, but I just want to understand, you could fund the full request, but it would just take away from your capacity to fund additional requests. Is that correct?
Yes, there's money there to do. It's financially feasible to do.
Okay, thanks.
It's financially feasible to do.
And I have a question.
Sure.
Is it is funding the 50% a question of timing? So if we had the luxury of, you know, starting construction 3 years from now, 4 years from now, would you be able to fund a higher percentage?
Yes.
Million.
I guess the answer to that is yes, because our town hall obligations wind down really quickly beginning in you know, we're in 2028, our obligations on town hall are $250,000, and we're done in 2031 with a payment of $50,000. So our obligations on town hall are winding down at that point. Rosemary is coming down as well, but that's, you know, sure, there's more money that's going to be freed up, and it's always, I guess, a question of timing. But I would say we're clear of town hall beginning in 2030. We're essentially clear of town hall beginning after 2029. So that's in 7 years.
Thank you. Louise?
So if I recall correctly, we were doing a feasibility study of where uses of the building. And I think one of the, or actually I'm going to say 2 questions for me are: one, is this the best use of the building for school administration? And 2, is this also best use of the funds? So the way I would put the 2 questions would be, if we were simply determining where are we putting school administration, is this where we would put it? And would we be spending this amount of money for the school administration building? And then the second question is really relates to the building. So the town owns the building. Do we think that this is a building worth preserving and spending a certain amount of money for? In which case, then we just determine what the sources of funding are for that particular building. And if there are questions of timing, which would include if we just delay the building by 2 years or 3 years, now we can fund it entirely through CPA, then we should discuss that. Those are my two kind of questions to the committee and thoughts.
So Louise, I'm sorry, is that a question for me or a question for the committee?
I think it's really a question for the committee. It's not really a question for the CPC.
Right.
You know, the CPC is looking at whether this is historic preservation or not. And I think you've answered the question, yes. And you've answered the question of what you can afford in the short term and possibly what could be afforded if the project were started later. And I think the question for the finance committee is, so what does that mean for us?
Can I interject, if I may? I just want to clarify what my position is, because I'm not staring at a model that we built out. Okay, so just to understand that you're just, you know, getting me, I'm giving you an off the cuff remark. I mean, you know, I always feel confident in my statements, but I could be proven wrong. And so that's a technical question where we haven't built a model around, just with that caveat. Okay.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a direct answer to Louise, but I do have a comment that I think that builds on it. And my, I guess my hesitation on this article at this time is that I don't think we can go forward in a vacuum of just looking at this, that we need to have a full on discussion, analysis, and looking at all the major capital projects that are in front of the town over the next 5 to 10 years. And what comes to mind is Mitchell. What comes to mind is Pollard. What comes to mind is school administration. What comes to mind is High Rock, and other ones that aren't in front of mine, but I know that we have them. And I think that we need to look at everything comprehensively. We need to look at priorities. We need to look at order. We need to look at what financing situation is, what's possible, what's not possible. And we just can't do one project in a vacuum. Everything has to be looked at collectively. And so this project to me can't go forward in this manner, at least as far as I'm concerned, because it's just sort of put into a vacuum to all of a sudden appropriate design funds for something when all those other things are equally part of this discussion, and we haven't nearly got to that discussion yet. So I don't know if that's an answer, Louise, but that's certainly what my comment and what my feeling is, at least.
Josh?
Yeah, so I do agree with John. I think later on this evening on the agenda, we're discussing other capital projects as well. Just related to this article, I would hope that we make that decision about prioritization of projects before we take a position on this article, because I don't want to be in a position where there's no, where the town has disagreements about how to fund or whether to fund the Emory Grover renovation. And I don't want us to have to spend design funds on a project that there's no consensus on.
Peter, Rick Zambone wanted to offer his.
Oh, okay. Can we, Madam Chair, it's your meeting. If you want to call on Rick, that's great.
Okay, that's fine. Rick?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Rick, you got two logins here.
How do I get rid of that?
Why don't you get out,
Get
entirely and come back in
one of
again?
them.
Get on them both and come in again.
In the meantime,
Dick?
okay, I just want to put something on the table where there's a very small chance that this could happen, but it's not entirely out of the question, so I think we just ought to be aware of it. As both Jim and John know, there's a movement on in the Catholic Church to consolidate parishes. And in theory, St. Joe's and St. Bart's are going to be consolidated somewhere in a 2-year time frame. While it's unlikely, it's at least conceivable that that could happen at St. Bart's. And if that ever happened and St. Joe's were available, then you're looking at building side by side that something very interesting could happen. I think we ought to track that down to make sure that's as remote as we all expect it is, rather than 4 years from now, have it happen and say, if we'd only thought about that, we would have done something different. I don't know whether John or Jim, you've got any perspective on that better than mine, but the last I heard, it's 2 years away.
So I think that's confirmed, Madam Chair. 2 years from now, there'll be a consolidation. And my own guess is, but I think it's a pretty educated guess, is that the St. Bartholomew's property and assets will go to St. Sebastian's. And as a result, you'll have the movement of one parish over to St. Joseph's. So the question will be, what will St. Joseph's reaction be to that? And I mean, it's no secret that they occupy the property right next door. There is no parking for St. Joseph's. There's no other really, they're landlocked. There's no other buildings for any other types of activities or a theater or anything else at that facility. So I think, I raised this possibility 7 or 8 years ago. I said, that's where the discussion should be. We should try and figure out whether or not there's a synergy there. But, there wasn't much of a interest in trying to do so. But Dick's right. In 2 years, you're going to see a changing landscape with respect to what the needs are for that particular property.
Madam Chair,
I agree.
Rick,
I just wanted to make sure my sound is working.
Yes.
it is working and it's not working doubly, so go
All right.
ahead.
We're good. No, we've gone beyond, so we don't need to go back. I'm fine. Thanks.
Barry?
All I would add is obviously there was a process that, that a committee went through to determine, what should be done with school admin. I mean, their recommendation was this project. I'm not sure. We have no idea whether ultimately that's what town meeting's gonna want to do. I hadn't really thought about delaying this to a few years to potentially allow for all of it to come through the CPA. That's probably the biggest purely financial benefit to the town from the standpoint of having other funds available, more funds available for some of the other projects. I don't disagree that we need to look at this in the context of everything else that we're going to have to think about in terms of capital projects. My guess is, from a priority standpoint, this would be at, if not near certainly from the school's perspective, this is their priority. That I do know. Again, that's their one voice. But I don't disagree that we shouldn't defer this until we have a much broader picture of everything else that we're going to have to consider over the next several years, and how best to finance them in an orderly fashion that fits within our guidance.
So any other comments? Because in fairness to the CPC, they were presented this application. Theirs is not to really discuss the strategic merits really of where school administration should be. So
I've worked really hard to keep my committee in its lane. And you're in a different, you guys occupy a very different space. I just want to clarify, I just want to make one point though, which is, although the question of two points, which is on the question of could you better afford it if you delayed it? Answer, yes. But I don't want you to walk out of here thinking that that was the only deciding factor in coming up with this, putting a stake in the ground of $6 million. Because there may be other factors involved, and from the committee's perspective. And so when we arrived at that place, I didn't poll the individual members as to why it is that you're there. But that's where we arrived. Did we pivot from the fact that the affordability and the fact that it would really financially hamstring us going forward? Did we pivot from that issue? Yes, we did. But there could be other issues with other members in terms of funding a $12 million obligation and restricting it, maybe less restrictive, but still restrictive. So I just want to clarify that. So I don't want anyone to walk out of here thinking, well, if we delay it, we can get the full 12 million from CPC in 5 years.
Rick?
Peter, question if I may. In the stuff that you gave us to read, you referenced that there were some members that wanted to suggest more than the 25% and some members that wanted to suggest less. I guess keep it in your own lane, to use your words. Can you talk further on the position of those members who wanted to give less?
It's almost easier for me to just talk about the person who wanted to give more, who had an interest in the historic preservation of the building. Less, I think that there was a feeling, I guess I think I do have a sense of this, from the two members that were interested in allocating less. There was a sense that CPC funds should be the prioritization of CPC funds, and whether or not it should be such a substantial amount of our funds should be devoted to, these two large bonding projects. And that is, hold on a second. Some people glibly call us a bank, and I would correct them and say, no, we're a grant source. And so we're a source of readily available funds. And should we be devoting this amount of money and devoting this percentage of our funds to this one project? Is this something actually that the town should be taking on a greater financial burden than, as opposed to shifting it onto the shoulders of CPC? So I don't want to debate that, but I think that's kind of that open discussion. I don't know how embedded that thought is, but those were kind of some of the thoughts the one thought by one member that was expressed. So.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
So if there are no further questions on Emory Grover, maybe we should just keep going.
Okay, I want to just add too that we haven't heard. We've actually, when we're talking about 25%, there was we were saying, instead of this full design amount, design funds, we were going to prepare to fund $375,000 of it. So there's $1 million out there, and so we haven't heard a position on that question of whether or not that's going to be funded from some other source, as opposed to all the other issues that we've discussed. All right, so.
Louise, did you have another question?
This is a general comment, again, not necessarily directed to this particular question. But so if we have a project that could be viewed as fully eligible under, for CPA funds, and now the CPC decides they only want to fund a certain percentage of it. And in reality, these are all taxpayer funds, and it is a grant, quote unquote, but it's a grant from tax monies. And so I think when we consider what our position is going to be on some of these, I think we should consider that as well, that just because the CPC decides they only want to fund a certain percentage of it, if it's something that should be funded, is part of the CIP, whatever our criteria are. I'm not going to, I'm not stating those are the criteria, but if that is the case, then, what is the point of our discussion here? Are we asking the CPC is consulting with us, but what is our feedback back to them about their particular position with respect to this? And I'm not sure that we're ready to discuss this today. We're just being presented with the information by the CPC, but I think that's something we should consider.
Jim.
A couple of thoughts, and I know that this is just a consultation. But one thought is that exactly where we all want to spend these taxpayer monies, as Louise has said, because that's all it is, it's a surcharge on our tax, is a question that I think needs to be looked at within a holistic viewpoint, which gets back to John Conley's point, which is, tell me, what is the overall plan for the schools? What is the overall plan for the rest of the school buildings? And then we can kind of make a decision where this one kind of rises to the top. That's one comment. Second is that I know that I've heard from Representative Garlick on a number of occasions that there is a great desire to do something with the Chambers Street area. We did some work on some of the townhouses at the upper end of that area. But the whole Chambers Street area itself, right across from High Rock, hasn't been upgraded in years. And I think there's also a great need to work on that from an affordable housing standpoint. And it just seems to me, and Peter, by the way, I think I've told you before, you do an incredible job and you're a great public servant. But it seems to me, if we can kind of look at this more globally, even though I know you're presented with one project at a time and you have to deal with one project at a time, it's not like you can sit there and say, well, what about this, what about that? But if you're getting consultation, my consultation would be, I would love to see this more from a holistic approach about where these monies are going to be spent globally with respect to what the priorities are of the town as set forth by the select board. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Sometimes I glibly say we're a cog in the wheel. And I want, to be honest with you, I just want to get it right. I think your comments are spot on, Jim. I just do. And so, and we're trying. It's a little bit of that's coming up on the community housing funding, community housing bucket funding issue. Is we're trying to address that. We'll talk about that on the back end, but it really came up in the context of where are we going here? Where are we going? How are we doing this? And we need to have a discussion about it. So I agree with you. I do. And Louise, I don't think we can sit here and say, I think it's all town funds. We have some responsibility as members because we just don't decide eligibility. Because if we just say, is it eligible for funding under the act and then go home? We do due diligence. We have a role, but we have to, there are certain, kind of norms that we have to conform with, including the fact that this is all taxpayer money. And it's, we understand that. And as I say, we're a cog in the wheel. We got to, what I'm saying in that is we got to work cooperatively, we got to make this work. And when we have if we can look at it globally and holistically, that's great. I think that's a successful approach.
Thank you. Dick?
Sort of building on the last two comments, it seems to me that the purpose underlying CPC is to provide funds for projects and activities that may not have a strong constituency across the town as a whole. And so the concept of the two who's saying, should we look at underfunding? I think that should get a lot of weight and consideration in that, are there other projects that would not normally get funding that do present strong cases for funding?
Right. Yeah.
And I would just add, Dick, it's not necessarily who doesn't have a constituent, which I agree with you, but it's also where are the things that are eventually left off the backside? What are the ones that, and so they wanted to say, well, geez, we should have historic preservation. No one wants to pay for historic preservation, so we're going to put that in there. then we're going to put in, the conservation, and we're going to put in, eventually fields. Well, no one wants to put money there, so we'll put it there. And then the last one, of course, is affordable housing. We all say we want it, but no one wants to build it or pay for it. So there was that, initiative to try and momentum to try and get that going.
Yeah, so that's kind of the nuance, right? Which is, sure, it's all town money, but we have to understand that we have some charge, and there's some reason why we're here. And it's a hard one to put your arms completely around. And some people say it's the extras that we wouldn't ordinarily pay for. But I think that Jim has stated the case, kind of succinctly and appropriate. So that's one of those nuances that we have to consider, and not just say it's all town funds. Open up, it's available, it's eligible, spend it.
Rick.
Yeah, just to build a little bit on the conversation here. And Peter hit the nail on the head when he first initiated the discussion on this, was that we rapidly, as we looked at a $12 million investment into the Emory Grover building, we rapidly came to the conclusion, as I think it was Jim that pointed out, there are going to be a whole other series of projects that are on the drawing board with funding identified or dollars identified. And there are other projects that are on the drawing board in the next 3 to 5 years that we can't do it all. If we were to fund to 12 million, we would be left, for all intents and purposes, with just the state match, because at that level we would have been committing almost up to our 70% limit on debt financing. So we now have to struggle with the fact that we don't have enough money, even with the surcharge and the state supplemental funding that we get every year, to do all the projects that people want. And if you just look at the projects that are on the presentation for the last item in the financing, you'll see that there are many projects. And Jim, you mentioned one that is clearly on the radar screen and that's one of the reasons why we're looking to go to the 22%, because there are 3 major projects looking at almost $5 million out of the Needham Housing Authority. And that's only a small percentage of the money they're going to be trying to capture through other state and federal funding sources. So that's the purpose behind this. We took a big picture. We said, we have to start trying to prioritize as we're moving forward, because we can't satisfy all the needs. And that's a subject for later, but I just wanted to kind of tie it together.
Louise. Thank you, Rick.
So I guess the most direct way for me to express this is, if it would cost us $4 million to put the school administration somewhere else, and it's going to cost us $12 million because what we're trying to do is renovate the historic building, then really that $8 million should be coming out of CPA funds. Like, that's the simplest way that I can express it. So, and the 25% may be correct. It may be that only 25% of the cost is because we're preserving a historic structure, and the 75% is the cost associated with the town, the school administration. So I'm just trying to clarify, my thought process and my thinking.
I don't mean to belabor this, but have you actually looked at the, because we've had presentations. Okay, so but the numbers that we saw were basically, if you build the box, it's essentially the same cost as it is to, and hey, if I'm wrong, that's fine. I don't want to, again, that's a little bit out of my lane, but I was kind of brought in at an earlier process, and that's what I thought I saw in front of me, which was, there's not much difference between the renovation addition and historic preservation cost, and then the cost of building the box on that site. It all seemed to be about a wash, and which is not a bad place for me to be as CPC, because if you're saying we only have to pay the delta, we would be in a good spot. I'm being a little glib, but anyway.
Rick?
Peter, and to your last point, I've sat here for a number of years and listened to Steve Pauper and George Kent go on and on and on about how fact it's much cheaper to build new than it is to restore. And so I have to believe that $27 million to do what they want to do on that site has to be demonstrably cheaper if we tear the thing down and build a new, to use your word, a box. And so in essence, that all those kinds of conversations, I think, need to take place prior to what we're doing right here, obviously, with respect to you, of course, but you're going to come up with a percentage, and then people are going to go off and deliberate, well, what do we do with Emory Grover? And then we take a position and move forward. But I can't believe for the life of me that whoever is preaching that game, that to build new is the same price as to restore.
Just to clarify, when they're talking about restoring, it's really, for all intents and purposes, if you looked at the plans, it would be a rebuild. I mean, it's literally gutting it with the facade left over. And so that's how the numbers came in, fairly comparable with maintaining a wall in our facade. And I guess it falls under, for definitional purposes, it falls under the definition of a renovation. But anyway, that's not the debate for here. The numbers aren't materially different to raise it, build new versus put in addition, to gut it and keep a wall and make a big addition in renovation.
I don't know, Barry. I mean, I played in that gym up on the 3rd floor. I might be one of the only people here that was in that gym. And I think if you're going to preserve the building, you got to bring the gym back.
Take that up with PBBC. Never get that right. Anyway.
Okay, should I move on?
Yeah.
All right, we're at 2202. Don't worry, it's going to go much faster. That is a request by the town clerk, preservation of town Needham marriage records. And just to clarify, this has to do with the period beginning 1919 to the present. It's not tagged based on pandemics, but it is tagged based on the fact that there was a prior grant for the period prior to 1919 into the 1700s, where the marriage records were deacidified and bound, and then CDs were made of them. This request is for an upload and a document management system, scanning and upload to a document management system for 1919 forward. So in the net of it is, we're going to end up with 2 different systems, one CD prior to 1919, and the other just an upload scan. But both electronic versions are available, just 2 different systems. We've talked a little bit about could you potentially do the old CDs upload onto this. I guess that's possible, but this grant is only for that scanning. And I think really, when I looked at the request, it really had to do with the actual cost involved of scanning these pieces of paper. They were like charging us by the book. So that's how we ended up with this number. But the good news is it's all going to be preserved. And we're, since the committee's in favor of it, it's a relatively small amount, preserves historic records, has some benefit going forward. So that's any questions regarding this? Okay, Town of Common, historic redesign, beautification. This is our, the reconstruction of our town common. The request is for construction funds in the amount of $1,364,000. Just to clarify, it's for the period, it's for the space between Garrity Way to our sidewalk. So all that nice masonry work that we've done, that's going to fit in. And the blue tree is going to be preserved. It's going to be temporarily taken out and then put back in. I think that $1 million of this is going to be eventually be funded by open space, which it's eligible. And the latest that we've learned is that $364,000 of the project is to be funded from general funds. So it's going to be a subject of a special town meeting warrant article. And I think that we're doing that. I haven't seen the final shakedown of all of these numbers, but I think it's so that we can pay for this money out of CPs. It's a question of payment of getting these things paid for. So it ends up being $1 million request from CPC and $364,000 from the town, a special town meeting warrant article. Any questions? Okay, next, 2205, Fisher Street Trailhead, request for $15,000. Last year, there was a request for $15,000 to fund the design work. That money was actually returned because the town designed it, the trailhead parking area in-house on its own dime. And this request for $15,000 is for materials the town is going to provide for labor. And this is for that trailhead out near Red Hawk. The Red Hawk Bay. Red Hawk Bay. Thank you, Jim. Okay, I reveal myself as an out-of-towner ultimately at times. Okay.
That's only because you've been here for only 30 years, Peter.
I know it. Actually, it's 23. It's as long as I've been married. Okay. All right. So,
just one question, Madam Chair.
Sure.
I apologize. What is a trailhead?
So a trailhead is where a trailhead is the beginning of the trail or the end of the trail. So this common parlance is to call it the trailhead. When you're reading the narrative in your book about where to park your car and they tell you what to look for, when they say the trailhead begins near the granite rock, a quarter of a mile from the street, it's the beginning of the trail or the end.
Will there be a bubbler?
I do not think so.
I'm joking. Sorry.
We got to get you on a hike, Jim.
Yes, I do.
Okay. No questions regarding that. Okay, next up is 2206, resurfacing of the synthetic track at Defazio. That's a request for construction funds in the amount of $166,000. And that's a spray resurfacing of the synthetic track, which will extend the useful life of the track by another 10 or 12 years, and we'll get between 20 and 25 years of use out of the track.
Louise?
Didn't we have discussion last year about this being a maintenance item rather than item under CPA? I forgot what the categories were, but that this was specifically a maintenance item?
I think that you asked that question, and I think that I respond. I think that it falls under capital, under the definition of the act. So I think it's a capital investment, but because it substantially improves and lengthens the useful life of the product, I think it kind of fits under the definition of capital investment under the CPA statute. So I think we tested that, but I need to keep my notes of what I promised, because that's the part that gets me into trouble. So I'll look at that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Pingatore, you are correct. That was the way we reviewed it and came up with the answer for that.
All right, well, that's, okay. Louise, will that suffice?
So you're saying that, yeah, I'll look at that. Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
Dick?
And as I understand it, Rick, you answered this question last year too. There is a provision that you can't use this for artificial, normally you can't use CPC funds for artificial turf type of things, but this doesn't come under that prohibition, as I recall.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. Mccloud field renovation. This is a request for $45,000 to design the rebuild of the field I think the Warren article actually emphasizes the 48-inch, 4-foot drain pipe that runs, that it really happens to run under Mccloud Field. And so that was kind of the subject of a lot of going back and forth on this request. I bring it up because it kind of, there's a group of 3 projects that we were dealing with, which we felt were kind of stretching the definition of what our obligations were under the CPA. And so to kind of be glib about it, the 40, as I put it, the 4-foot pipe is there. It's just a geographic mistake. I mean, it could have been out on the street, and it appears to be leaking, and so it needs to be repaired. And in the course of it leaking over many years, it's effectively destroyed the field. So what our position has been is that we don't think it's CPC's obligation to repair the 4-foot pipe, or even to be involved in the design of what to do with the 4-foot pipe. But we do think it's appropriate use of CPC funds to design and then the rebuild of Mccloud Field. There's going to be some added amenities to Mccloud Field. Does everybody know where Mccloud Field is? It's in, okay, good. And it was I think it was repaired as part of the field, or it was, I think that what their understanding is that the 4-foot pipe got damaged in connection with the Field of Dreams renovation project, for what that's worth.
Well, what really happened is that when they were doing the Field of Dreams project, that same pipe went under both one of the artificial turf fields and the track. And they actually did have to spend a lot of money fixing it. What they didn't know is that the rest of the pipe that went on into the reservoir area was also damaged. Had they known that, they probably would have fixed it at that point. But that's kind of what happened. It's the same pipe that they had to repair back in 2009 and 10.
Okay. So whatever we've estimated the amount, I mean, I know we're quibbling over thousands of dollars, but I guess sometimes it's the principle of the thing. It's $3,000 or $4,000 cost related to the design of what to do with the pipe. And that's going to be paid for out of general funds. And so the $45,000 is a request to essentially to do all of the design work for the Mccloud Field. Questions?
I played for John Mccloud. So as far as I'm concerned, he gets my 100% approval for this.
Okay. Josh, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So I saw on the write-up, it says the sense of the committee is not clear at this time.
Okay, so I'm clarifying that. I think we're pretty clear. We brought Ed Olson back in, and we asked for a more complete presentation of what the renovation of the field was going to look like. And we teased out this question of $3,000 to $4,000. Again, sorry to be quibbling over this amount of money, but and so I think the sense of the committee is very supportive. I didn't poll anyone. I feel pretty confident. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, next up is Trail Identification Professional Design Service. This is a request for $6,000, and this is design funds and for developing a uniform trail identification system. Trailhead signage, information kiosks, and directional signage, sometimes called blazes, as well as just actual the paper maps, two-dimensional paper maps. They want to design a uniform system throughout the town. One thing that I did press on this was, okay, that's the FinCom's going to ask me, okay, this is design funds. How much is it going to cost to install this? And it's pretty flexible because they don't really have a full inventory of what the status of the kiosks are, and the kiosks appear to be the most expensive item. And again, for those of you who don't normally walk on the trails, there's it's a little kind of covered. Probably like a 4x8 structure with a little bit of shingle roof on top. And underneath it are pieces of paper, warning signs, maps, things like that. And they deteriorate over time. And so ours are pretty dilapidated. Some of the signage is pretty dilapidated too. The other thing that we pressed on this issue was, okay, this is fine, but you know, do we have some sort of commitment from the town that they're going to maintain this, maintain the kiosk, and don't let it fall into deliberate disrepair and then come back to us and say the kiosks have all rotted out. We'd like to have, we'd like to make it a capital investment of new kiosks. We wanted some commitment about maintenance, and we've had an open discussion about that, and some, good faith assurances that there's going to be a maintenance project going. Okay. Questions? Oh, go ahead.
Tom?
Excuse me, Peter. In the public hearing, it wasn't clear to me, is this going to cover all trails in town, including park and rec trails, or is it just, I got the impression it was just from the Conservation Commission.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to, it's not going to involve like the trail that's behind the Sununu Williams School. There's a walking trail there, right?
No, I'm thinking more like a town forest, which is park and rec land, or there's a lot of park and rec trails. And I didn't know
I thought
that was included.
That's a good question that I thought it did include that. I have two other committee members here. It's so can you give me an example of what you think it might not include? You say it might not include town forest?
Well, I got the impression that it was, since it was a request, I think, from the Conservation Commission. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Peter, I think this is just for the design of what all of the signage and everything would look like, and what the trail maps themselves would look like. And that's where we ran into a problem, as to the second phase of this, is to how much money it was going to cost to put them on all the trails in town. And I remember specifically them asking about putting the signage throughout the entire town on every trail. So I have to believe, Tom, that it's going to be covering the town forest, all of the trails in town, but that's really part of phase 2, I think.
That was my sense. That was my sense.
Okay, so if it's for the design, then when the request for funds, then I can actually ask the question, is it going to cover more trails? So thank you.
Artie?
Just to follow up, there was a very specific mention about, is this going to, or what are the signages going to look like that replaces the little birdhouses in town forest? So there was a specific comment about some of the signage in town forest.
Okay, thank you.
Dick?
Who's it contemplated this money will be paid to, and what will this person or organization produce? What's being designed here?
Okay, so we actually have examples of that. And then, so I can, because it's a little difficult to kind of grasp, and because I would say, what is the work product? What are we getting out of this? And so it's really kind of almost like, it's up there on, posted as part of the application, but that's okay. I can forward the information because that's the exact question that I had. But the example would be, okay, it's a lot of graphic design, for example. So it's going to be, this is what this is what the maps are going to look like. So here's an example of something else that we did in another town, Potterfield. And you can see there's a green, walking trail. There's a red Morgus hiking trail. There's a blue bicycling trail. And they kind of, it's like, so throughout the town, everybody's going to go with the red, blue, green. And this is what the font's going to look like. This is what the color scheme is going to look like. I'm trying to get to understand what we were going to be doing with, I think that with the kiosk, we were going to be doing an inventory of what the condition of them were, the kiosks were, and then an assessment of whether or not they could be repaired, should be repaired or replaced. So actually kind of walking these places and finding out using a consultant to actually walk the trails and find out where the blazes should be, and what the map should be showing, and where the kiosks should be located and which ones need to be replaced. I mean, that's basically it. But I will, I will forward that to you after this meeting, okay? Is that okay, Dave?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Next up is Walker Pond. And I think that what I can say to Walker Pond is that that request for $125,000, is going to be the subject of the special town meeting warrant article, requesting funding from free cash. That is another one of those articles where we felt, it's a request for installation of 3 6-foot diameter drainage manholes and a tree installation system, which is kind of this really elaborate catch basin. And that's, and the installation of wildflowers, all of it kind of dealing with water inputs into the pond. And our sense of this was, that's kind of ancillary to our responsibility and the main thrust of the project, which is to remove the invasive species in the pond. We're kind of looking at how we addressed Rosemary Pond, which was water inlets weren't really, we didn't use CPC funds to address them. Most of them were covered. Sometimes if they were open, we would address those. But this kind of, water and sewer infrastructure stuff, is kind of ancillary to what our main charge is and ancillary to this main program here, which is they want their Walker Pond, the invasive species, removed permanently and addressed. So with respect to this project, it's getting that issue of our concern about the scope of our responsibility. That was addressed by being the project, this phase of the project being moved to an obligation of the town being paid for by free cash. I guess if you want questions regarding that, I'll take them. Like if you think that, I guess the way I'm not opening myself up to trouble, but it's like, if you think that I have it wrong, that's fine too. Or we have it wrong. No questions? Okay. Town reservoir sediment removal. This puts a finer point on it because this original application was for $262,000 and it was described as to determine the best way to address the sediment at the town reservoir. Well, what we have though is, as part of our due diligence, $175,000 is the cost of evaluating and developing a design for bid contractor services to remove the sediment. $87,000 really is a separate project, and that's to evaluate and design the cleanup of the inlets to the reservoir. And just to kind of give you a feel for it, they're going to go, this is an appropriate project, but they're going to be looking at the catch basin structure going through the golf course, beyond the golf course, onto Harris, right to the base of Birds Hill, maybe, and then around Broad Meadow. So that those are catch basins and water inlets that eventually do find their way into the town reservoir. But we thought that was beyond in our responsibility. I do think you could probably make some argument about that we could fund it. I think it might actually be, we were told by the executive director, this is secondhand information, but we did some research. We couldn't find anything on the database at the Community Preservation Alliance to support a project like this. And the executive, we had some discussions, informal discussions with the executive director of the Community Preservation Alliance, who said he's heard of lawsuits threatened, objections on the floor of town hall, town meeting in other towns for funding these kinds of infrastructure projects. So this one is pretty easy too, so we're going to fund for $175,000 of it. $87,000 is going to be paid, is going to be the subject of another special town meeting warrant article. Okay, questions?
So I have a question about the warrant articles. So any project that's being funded through both CPC and free cash, how are those going to be discussed together? How does that work on town meeting floor?
I was trying to understand how we did it in the past, because because there have been times where we funded part of it, and I can't remember how we did it. You know, so we have done it that way in the past. Sometimes if we're you know what, Josh, I'm gonna punt on that. We were trying to noodle that through, but when I walked out of the discussion with Karis Lustig, I had it in my head and I understood it. But now I'm a little confused about how the mechanics of it work. You know, I don't want to put Jim Healy on the spot, but when he was with the trustees of the Memorial Field, the CPC funded only a part of that building. And then some of it was funded out of the general reserve. I thought that we made the full presentation through CPC. Is that what we did?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
And then the funding source came, and there were other funds that were allocated for the project. You're right.
I think right. So I think that's probably how we're going to do that. I don't know if Karis is on the call or not, but she
So it'd all be within a single article and just be different funding sources?
No, we're not going to do that. I don't think that's how that works. You think that's how it worked, Jim? Is that how it worked last time?
I do think that. Well, Dave,
Dave,
That is not how it works.
Dave?
Yes, each of the warrant articles that Mr. Pingatore spoke to will be a standalone article, and it will have multiple funding sources. If it has multiple funding sources, it'll be contained in the main motion. It'll indicate what portion is coming from CPA and what portion is coming from the general fund. So in the instance of the reservoir sediment removal, the appropriation request is for $262,000. The portion to which CPC is making the recommendation for funding is $175,000 from CPA funds, and $87,000 will be from the general fund. But because the application was submitted to CPC, they will take the lead in terms of the presentation, but the requesting body, if asked, would also address town meeting questions.
So I have a question, because CPA funds can only be voted up or down. They cannot be amended. So I think that we should probably get town council to opine on how this mechanically is going to work. Just my own thought. Yeah.
This actually happened in prior years, and town council did opine. For instance, town hall project had multiple funding sources. The Rosemary Recreation Facility had multiple sources. Town meeting does have the right to amend the portion of the request that is not funded from CPA funds. It's only the portion that the CPC controls that is an up or down vote.
Okay, any additional questions on that article? Okay, Dave, thanks for the clarification. Okay, so then the next one is, it's 2212, and that's increasing the affordable housing bucket contribution. But that's kind of a placeholder, because that really actually comes into play when we're discussing warrant article 33. I think that's what it is, the finance article.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a proposal to increase the CPA funds allocated or set aside for the Community Housing Restricted Funds Reserve account from 11% to 22%. It's obviously only for 1 year. We had done an analysis which showed that open space and recreation had accounted for 59% of all appropriations. Historic has accounted for 37%. Community housing has accounted for 4%. One thing I want you to note, though, is that the appropriations do not include the amount currently set aside in the Community Housing Reserve or Open Space Reserve accounts. So it's not what's already in the bucket. And it's weighted because we're we're talking about appropriations, and so we're calculating in the full amount appropriated over a period of years for the pool and for the town hall. Because otherwise, I mean, we're allocating 10%, we're appropriating 10% a year, every year, to community housing, and you may scratch your head and say, as I did, and said, I don't understand why it's 4% then, but that's why, because we're not looking at the amount that's in the savings account, and the calculation is somewhat weighted because we're looking at appropriations that are actually going out in the future. Another thing, so I did, just for your information, is that the reserve account amounts for community housing is roughly $2.5 million. And so this amount would increase, roughly the increase for this year from $350,000, which would be 11%, to roughly $700,000, which would be 22%. And so I think that we did this. I don't know if we have a nice PowerPoint presentation, and I put those slides in as part of your package. So we had a working group. I was not a member of it because we have the tradition, and it's appropriate for people who may be representing that constituent group to not be part of the advocacy of it. So I'm actually a town moderator appointee to CPC. My term with the Housing Authority having ended in last April, but I still think it's appropriate. It's not appropriate for me to present that, and I'll have somebody else from the working group make the presentation. In fact, there'll be I think that the whole finance article will be presented. My anticipation is that Rick Zimbone will present the finance article because it's going to come up in this. We've heard, I'll just kind of address this in kind of a more, I'll address some of what I think are kind of anticipated issues and discussion points, right? So we took this look, and we tried to figure out how can we correct this this inequitable distribution. What can we do to address that? And we thought that the most effective way would be to designate these funds over here. And you may ask, well, why don't you just kind of understand that you should keep them in the general reserve and start building the account that way, and with an eye towards eventually spending a significant amount of money towards a community housing project. And our answer is, well, it's kind of the same reason why we have reserve accounts in other parts of our financial structure in town. We have a reserve account for our athletic field replacements and things like that. It's just kind of trying to institute the same kind of discipline on this in CPC and on the committee, and also kind of making that statement to the town that we have this commitment. We also understood that with respect to the Needham Housing Authority, it's a separate entity, government entity, and so it cannot be the subject of a bond. So when we come up with $1 million, $1 million project, we could fund out of cash. A $2 million, a $3 million, a $4 million project, those are probably going to be bonded, but you can't do that for the Needham Housing Authority. We've looked at the Housing Authority is really developing some good momentum towards rehabbing and adding to the significantly redevelopment and additions to the housing units. And we saw a projection that, with an investment by CPC of $4 million, we could address 4 major projects and leverage that $4 million into like a total of a $30 million project, $30 million of other source funds. So, but we need to have that money available. We can't bond it. So we're trying to build up that savings account. And we think that this is the most effective way of doing it. And again, it's only a 1-year commitment. So I've heard, there's one member of town meeting who said, well, why don't we wait and see what happens in 2022? Maybe Congress is going to allocate all sorts of funds that are going to help us. I think that it's just something for you folks to consider. I think that in this infrastructure bill, which is just getting started, they are defining infrastructure rather broadly. We've heard, and infrastructure may very well involve commitment by HUD to its substantial housing stock. So there could be some significant federal projects if the infrastructure bill is defined right, it defines that in that way, and it includes this, and if it passes. But now this is not my day job. I don't do housing, I don't do finance, I don't do public housing, I do other kinds of work. But so it's kind of an avocation, not a vocation. But based on the things that I've read and seen, you always need a small funding source and certainly a local commitment. One of the principles involved lately is when you're doing these tax credit or tax-based developments, and you're dealing with a third-party developer, that developer wants to see the town, some sort of commitment to the town, because it's so easy to block these developments. And an easy way to show that is an actual cash investment by the town. You know, no, we're going to commit money to this project. We want it here. You know, we want that 62 unit senior housing built here, and we're supportive of it. So it's almost one of those principles that they look at in order for us, little old Needham, to actually attract the developer to risk the development of such a building. And so that's kind of our thoughts on it. You know, my thinking on it, we're in an interesting time. And I guess my thought is that we're in an interesting time. We're faced with a severe housing shortage in this region that's eventually going to just choke off all economic development. And we are 13 miles away from a city that is among the highest, maybe the leader in disparities of wealth between the top and the bottom. And that kind of problem, I think we made a series of small decisions along the way that eventually got us into that big problem. And I think we can make a series of small decisions to help us get out of that problem, and doing something to facilitate affordable housing in our community, which is all of 14 miles from Boston, I think that this will go a long way for that. So I guess I'll leave that open to you folks. You may have questions. I would encourage you, and I should have done this, but I can send the Housing Authority presentation. I do want to emphasize, though, that this, funding, the community housing bucket can be used for many things. But, we have examples of it in our presentation. In the town of Belmont, they use it to, we use CPC funds actually to buy down units in the High Rock homes so that we made them more affordable. We dropped them from 100% AMI purchases to 80% by using CPC funds. So those are kind of examples that you can use community housing funds for. It's in an ideal world, you're using the 4 million to attract 30 million. And that's kind of the home run. And that's one of those things that we kind of have our eye on with respect to Linden Chambers and Seabed's Way and High Rock. Those are kind of the three focuses, and those are the Needham housing authorities. Now, remember too, we have the Needham Affordable Housing Trust, which is a town-controlled trust. And that trust is set up so that it can do all of these things. It can support community housing in any number of ways. We use that as the vehicle to fund the emergency rental assistance program that we funded in our last go round. So we have a mechanism in town to potentially use that. We don't, unfortunately, in this town, we don't have a community development corporation, but they don't need to be town-based. But those kinds of local initiatives, if you have people who are interested in that kind of development, and it's local, and they have a community development corporation in place, that's usually really helpful, and it really fosters and generates interest. But we have those two primary places, which is the Housing Authority and the Needham Affordable Housing Trust. And as I said, we were addressing this in terms of trying to plan going forward. The other thing, you may disagree with me on this, and I'm going to stop talking in a minute, which is my view on this on this program, the CPC, is that there are constituent groups and that we need to kind of serve all of them in order for this program to remain supported by the whole town. So I don't think it can be perceived as primarily a source of capital funds for Park and Rec. I think that there's only so much sustainable life in a program if that's what the perception is and that's where the money goes. I think it needs to be viewed for all of its intended purposes. Preservation of historic artifacts, open space, Park and Rec, and community housing. And to this point, when you see 4% for community housing, I think that that's a kind of a glaring weakness in the way we've administered the program. There are no bad guys here at all. We've made good decisions, I think, going forward, or in the past. I don't disagree with them. I just think that going forward, this is an opportunity for us to make adjustments that we think are appropriate. Rixenbone is primarily responsible for this initiative. He's put together a great PowerPoint presentation, and I've included those plates, or those slides, if you will, as part of the packet that we sent you. And if you have questions and if you want us to get more granular with it, that's great.
Tom?
So let me preface my comments by saying I'm completely supportive of improving the housing in town. Chambers Street and Linden Street need work. And also to let you know, I don't think of the CPC as CPA monies as primarily for sports and recreation. And I am a Field of Dreams supporter and a former Park and Rec commissioner. So I just wanted to clarify some of the points you made to make sure I understand everything. I believe you said currently there's $2.5 million in the housing reserve. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that this program is at this point just a year, I'll call it year to year, but right now you're just saying for this current year, you're not anticipating that you may or may not need it for future years. The reason I asked the question is you also mentioned that there was a target of $4 million.
Right.
That would suggest that 2 years of this approximately $800,000 would get you to your target. Is there an underlying belief that you will do this for a second year? And I am supportive of that, by the way. I just want to understand what your target is and what your projection is.
Yeah, I think that there is. I think, informally, it'd be pretty nice if we ran it for 5 years. And then that's what I think. We put together projections of over 5 years. So then that puts us at 3.5. That puts us at about 6 million. Or that puts us at 6 million, right? Do I have that right? The number's right?
You said 5 years?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, doubling it to 22% adds about 750,000 into the bucket. It's
right.
Approximately 75,000, 11%. So if you were to multiply that by 5 years, 750,000 is about just under $4 million, I believe.
Okay, so we're at 6.5.
Yeah.
Okay, and
there's more. One of the reasons why first of all, we can't approve more than 1 year at a time, obviously.
Yeah.
And we've got the projections based on a 5-year plan. And it's going to be incumbent upon the Housing Authority and the Housing Trust to start to put in applications. One of the problems is there's no applications in the next 5 years. So I would suggest, and I can't speak for everybody, but I would suggest that if they don't start to apply for some of this money, then the process will slowly grind to a halt and the money will be left in the general fund. And that's just my one person's opinion. But if they start to apply for this and there are real world applications, then clearly it's something that we as a town ought to continue, and that would be the argument.
Tom, I'll let you add. I want to add to that, if I may, if that's okay. So what we have on the Housing Authority side is they're starting to develop. They're starting to be in that position where they could potentially redevelop. So we have the master plan, the facilities master plan. That's a great document, but it went through all of the stock of the housing authority and came up with basically 3 proposals for development. Linden Chambers, High Rock, and a standalone 62-unit senior housing at Seabed's Way. That's when I said, and so one or all of those projects is going to happen soon. So they applied, the housing authority applied for and received funds from us for a consultant to basically bring them to the next level, which is find the funds and begin the process of picking and putting together either the renovation, replacement of Linden Chambers, or build another building at Seabed's Way. So we're going to see that. The point is that we're going to see something in the next 24, 36 months from the housing authority, and it's going to, and we're going to see something from the feds through the infrastructure bill, and we're going to potentially see something from the general court, because Linden Chambers is DHCD properties. But we'll know within the next 24 months if this is going to be a reality. If the housing authority is going to be able to renovate, redevelop Linden Chambers and add to its affordable housing stock. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. And you actually made one of my points for me, which is we need some applications. So thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Are there any other additional questions? Okay. None? Okay, well, all right. So that's it for me. I think that we're done with 30. We have the other warrant article is the adjust. So we've talked a little bit about the finance article. I think the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I think, Tom, are you going to do that finance article again? Which is just, it just kind of lists where the money goes into the reserve accounts. So it's the 3 reserve accounts and then the general reserve. And then there's an adjustment that we're going to have to make because we received more money than we had expected. And so we're going to adjust, I think it's an $11,000 approximate amount to each of community housing and open space because of the additional money that revenue that we received, because we fund these buckets based on anticipated revenue. And I think it has to do with the fact that we had anticipated 10% on a match. We got 17.7 or something like that. And we're not going to fund the $11,000 that would be due on the historic is not going to be appropriated because it all gets sucked up by payment on the bonds. Dave, have I presented that accurately? So that's going to be another warrant article that will follow the finance article. Okay, that's it for me, unless you have questions.
Peter, I just want to tell you, I think you did Richie Gatto very proud today. I don't know if you know him.
Well, Rich Gatto was the one who dragged me into the housing authority, sorry to be glib, but Rich was my next door neighbor. Yeah. And
he was a champion of this cause, and you've taken over. And so God bless you. Good job.
Well, he did ask me one day, are you ready to work in the vineyards again, Peter? And I didn't exactly know what that was going to lead to, but
well, good for you.
Okay, thanks you. Thank you all. Okay,
Peter,
thank you. Thank you, but actually, thank you.
Party.
You guys have, you guys are great and hardworking and talented group, and I really appreciate all the work that you do. I really do.
Thank you for the presentation, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, thank you all, and glad to see us again.
All right.
Good to see
Good
you.
night.
Take care, everyone.
Right.
Thank you very much for all your hard work. Appreciate it.
Night.
Madam Chair, I will bring in Stuart Chandler, the chair of the PPBC, and Steve Popper, and they'll let us know if they need anybody else.
Great, thank you.
They've asked me to share my screen and show you that sheet.
Okay.
Can people see that?
Well, yeah, a little bigger.
Maybe I'll just do the top. Is that good?
Yeah.
I don't know how to. Are you seeing full screen? I don't know what everyone's seeing.
I can see the screen.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, screen's fine.
Yeah, there is obviously, there's some text underneath there that's not coming through that is relevant, but
Well, if
Scroll up a little bit. There you go.
I can show it to you, but it's just very small.
yeah. That's fine.
Okay. I'll go one notch smaller to get that last. That's a lot. Okay.
So, Dave, is everybody in?
I apologize. I was speaking with mute on. Stuart Chandler is here and Steve Popper is here.
Okay, great. Stuart, Steve, thanks for coming. Did you want to take us through Article 38?
Sure, thanks. I'll take you through it and then we can get to questions and Steve can add as needed. So appreciate the opportunity to come before you folks and just give you a perspective on the 1.7 million request for the public safety project. As you know, the project is made up of the fire headquarters and police headquarter buildings replacement, as well as Fire Station 2. We had some conversations last summer regarding the budget and some unforeseen circumstances of expenditures, and we've had time to really work through that, and this is the summary. So if you look at the original project for the 3 buildings, we had a $70,385,000 figure. As of today and going through the project, what is encumbered from a funding standpoint is $70,384,700.74 to be specific. If you net that, we basically have $299.26 left in the budget. The reason that and if you take the next 10 months to finish the project, we will need additional funds. If you add everything up, it comes to a shortfall of $1.5 million. Let me just walk you through what is in the bucket of need. First, you have an anticipated cost log of $667,618 made up of key items that need to be covered in the project to finish it. We also have to cover a risk factor. If we've looked over the duration of the project to date and look at what we call sort of the burn rate or run rate of changes, we are foreseeing about an $80,000 per month run rate. Our objective is not to spend that, but in terms of a risk factor and what we need to cover to make sure this project can be delivered, we believe that's a number that needs to be put in place. So why are we where we are? Number one, we have a condition in the fire station number 2 that was brought up last summer and people were made aware. We worked through the actual aspects of that, and we had about $1 million of unforeseen contaminated soil cleanup. That is now complete. for Fire Station 2. And secondly, we have the unfortunate aspects of the pandemic, the COVID. We have about $340,000 of incurred costs, as well as what we are anticipating for expenditures. We have worked pretty hard to figure out what those anticipated expenditures are based on what's been happening over the last 3 or 4 months with the project. So I think we have a fairly good perspective on that. We will not say it's an absolute, but we have covered part of that. As we know, the complexity of these projects are big, and particularly in this public safety with 3 different buildings, with hopefully through now with fire headquarters online. Fire Station 2 is well on its way, as I'm sure some of you have driven by it and seen the structure up, all the steel is up, all the walls are up. So hopefully we will not see any unforeseen conditions around the building. We still have complexities with scope, conditions of the building as the physicality of it comes up. We always have these challenges as we move through these kinds of projects, but I hopefully they'll be small relative to Fire Station 2. But with police headquarters only beginning to fly the steel, putting the steel structure up, you still have some potential scope changes. Another thing that is important to understand in this project is in the ACL log, we had an item last summer, but we've had to increase that item, and we're trying to mitigate the risk of it, and that is the hillside. The definition of putting the hillside back to its original condition per the start of this project. We've had to increase that amount of money. Hopefully it won't go up, but that is a risk. Overall, the PVC, in working with Steve and Ken and the team, going through all the numbers the last several months and coming to the conclusion about the 1.7, as where we stand today in the end of February with the 1.5 deficit, the 1,467, as you see, anticipated project balance. If you look just to the right of that, you see the 1.7 request. Why would we be sticking to the 1.7 at this stage? The PVC had several deliberations about this, and we feel pretty strongly that it would be unprudent to go at the 1.5 only, because if we go to the well, so to speak, and get this money, if something really happens come July, August, September, we would have to come back and get requests for funds. So again, the objective is not to spend these funds. The objective is to put this team in position to deliver this project. So the extra 200,000 is essentially a contingency that the PVC believes should be in place, and that makes up the 1.7 that's in there. We continue to be very aggressive and diligent about the change logs. I think the amount of design errors that occurred early on are past us. However, as I've said before, the complexity of these projects and the conditions and as the physicality aspects come up, there's some things that crop up and you have no choice. It's how you got to manage it. So anyways, I hope that's a fair enough explanation for you. As if you look back at the numbers again, the 70.3, what is encumbered today with a remaining budget of 299, the COVID and the unforeseen contaminated sale cleanup really ate up a high percentage of the contingency. And so what we're trying to do is put money back into that contingency balance so this project can complete. With that, Steve, any comments from you relative to the project direction?
No other comments, no.
Okay, I just turn it back to you folks. I hope that was gives you enough insight, and we can certainly answer questions as needed.
Jim.
Yeah, I'm going to need a better explanation of why we're in effect reinstating the contingency account. Hasn't it accomplished what is it that this roughly $1,030,000 is going to, what are we guarding against with the balance of the project here? Because it's the 800 plus the 230 you're going to do to round it off. What's all that guarding against?
It's guarding against risk. If you have any scope changes that are forced from the building as it physically goes up, any complexities or changes that are absolutely required, any project issues that occur, Steve, you want to add any more flavor to that?
No, I think if we're looking at what the PVC is trying to accomplish with the 1.7, the coverage from 1.5 to 1.7 is additional risk.
John?
Well, it's actually coverage from 660,000.
Yep.
It's $1 million.
Yeah,
Well, the 80,000 run rate are, as Stuart said, we continue to see either scope changes or changes that occur as a result of design omissions or design errors. That was what the original contingency was intended to cover. It wasn't intended to cover the contingency or the cost of the soil remediation and the COVID costs.
Yeah, but you're at 70% of the project being completed at this point in time. You've identified a cost log of 660 through your good work of identifying these issues, which are either currently exist or you're going to have to deal with between now and when you finish the project. I don't understand another $1 million beyond that when you're at this stage of the project and you have all the professionals that you have in place on the project. Why there's another risk of another $1 million when you're at 70% done, the design is done. It just seems to me a risk that's, if you're using that as a term, and I'm not quite sure that's a term I would use, it seems like it's way too conservative in my own personal view.
Louise, could you bring Ken in on this call as well? Ken Sargent is our project manager.
Yeah, and I think as you're
involved in this discussion, what we have found as we go through the project is that we incur scope changes, we incur errors and omissions in design that have to be corrected by change order. And we had found at the point in time that when we first went into this discussion as to the overrun caused by these extraordinary conditions, that we were running about 80,000 a month of that type of cost that continues to impact the project. It's not unusual. It is the cost, it is the reason why contingency was in the project to begin with. So we have continued to use that 80,000 run rate as impacting the project from this point on to the end of the project. Now you can argue whether 80,000 is too conservative, but there certainly is a run rate. There is a cost for these types of events that impact the project.
Yeah, I just think putting him, I understand the placeholders that are the 600,000, and I have a question about one of them. But I don't understand the need at 70% complete with the design being completed for as long as it has been and all your professionals in place, why you need another $1 million at this stage of the project. Because there are some things, you can just say no to, or I'm afraid if the architect sees that and others sees that, their appetite is gonna be wed to spend that. And I know you guys don't want to, but it's the people we can't control who I'm afraid of. And I just think putting that out there at this point in time is not the right signal to put forward.
Can just quickly, Ken, are we truly at 70%?
No, and I don't have the exact number, but physically it may look like that. But if you say that the building's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, fire headquarters, police headquarters, fire station 2, we're approximately between 50 and 60% complete. With
Well,
the
the
funds-
billing,
funds
the
that we
billing,
committed.
Consigli's billing through February is at 63%.
But there's more to it than just consigli. You've got the architect's fees. You've got FF&E that hasn't been paid out yet. So while it may be 70% or more committed, it's not paid. And we're still working on that end. There are
I was
other
using in
things that
terms
are,
of the completion of the project. I think it's based on their billings, in which we're on March 24th right now. It's definitely 70%.
Consigli's contract with the change orders is, I don't know what it's up to now, but the original contract amount was 54 million on a $70 million project. So you got 63% of 70% of the project is consigli.
So let me ask you this way, what was the original contingency for this project, the original amount?
A little under 4 million.
And so take that 60%, so that's leaves $1.6 million of, in theory, if you used it. Am I thinking about it the right way? If it's uniform across the length of the project and you're 60% done, so 40% of that original contingency should be left outstanding in essence, is what?
Right, which would be approximately 1.6 million, and we're asking for 1.7 million, so it ties pretty closely.
Yeah, I mean, you use the contingency heavily in the beginning of the project when you're coming up out of the ground and having those, like what you ran into at Fire Station 2. At this stage of the project, 2.5 years into it, those uncertainties have pretty much all been, you've gone by them, and there's not much left to
we hope so, and that is the thinking as you go along. However, what we don't want to happen is to have something upset the apple cart, so to speak, and in November at town meeting we got to come back for more money if we use it up.
So what's wrong with that?
Yep. The optics, maybe.
I have a question. Could you just explain in general how the change control process works? Because like John said, I remember back in August when the soil issue first arose, you had already spent half of the contingency budget. So I guess my understanding, maybe I'm wrong, I thought the contingency budget was for completely unforeseen things like soil contamination. Whereas I guess what I'm hearing now is it's mostly for design deficiencies, which is, I guess, confusing for me because we spend so much money on designing of projects.
I wouldn't say it's geared towards that, but the normal construction projects normally carry anywhere from an 8 to 10% contingency. And if you recall back when this project was heading for approval at town meeting and at the polls, the feeling was among the select board, this committee, and others that the project amount could not start with a 7. It could not be 70 million. It had to be under 70 million. So as part of that, we cut our contingency back to 6%, which is less than what we would normally like to have on a construction project, especially one of this size and complexity. So we were kind of had our backs against the wall to begin with. But in terms of managing the contingency, when we find something, sometimes it's a design omission, sometimes it's a scope ad, like the police department asked to have bulletproof glass installed on the first floor windows, given the current climate and things of that nature. So we vet every change. There are plenty of changes that we shoot down. Fire department wanted to rearrange the kitchen over at Fire Station 2, and that was going to be a $50,000 ad, and we said no, and that was put in. There's been plenty of change orders that are proposed that don't go through. So we vet them based on need, affordability. Some of the stuff you can't avoid. Some things just happen, there's no way to avoid it. You know, they leave out a beam penetration for a pipe or something of that nature. You got to do it, obviously, but we try and keep the ads, if you will, to a minimum. MDOT made us do things over at the sheriff's office for the communication system that added over $250,000 to the project. Nothing we can do. It's their land. We got to do what they say. So it's things like that, and it doesn't take long to eat up, 6% contingency.
So I guess in two things, in terms of the requested additions, whether it's a kitchen or bulletproof glass, why isn't that integrated into the design phase? So that
because it wasn't asked for at the point of the design phase.
But then I guess my question is why does it then come out of the contingency? I mean, if it's not included in the design, then why isn't it left out?
But if we think it is a reasonable request, which in the case of the bulletproof glass, we felt it was, we put it through there. But like I said, there are other things that we don't put through because it just doesn't, I won't say it doesn't make sense, but it's not prudent, affordable, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. And then I guess the other point is just in the original request for the construction funds, I do remember that there was pressure to reduce the overall cost. I think the hope was that the scope would have been reduced rather than the contingency, because I think we didn't want to be in this position where we had to replenish the contingency.
And it was to some extent. We went through a very thorough value engineering process there, and I have the numbers. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but we had 12 or 14 pages of value engineering items that we went through. Some of them we went through on, others we didn't, and we went through yet another round at the request of the select board and this committee after the meetings we had last summer, and we shaved a few more bucks off. It wasn't huge, wasn't as much as the first round, but we did look at things to try and reduce the cost a little bit further.
Thank you.
Dick?
Yeah, I think the trouble that we're having, at least I'm having, is that it's a steady run rate. So you're saying the contingency exposure is as much in December as it is in March and April, which I think we're all having trouble with. And then we're saying, and for good measure, we're going to add 240,000 or 3 months worth just to round it off. And that's what at least personally, I'm having trouble with.
The 80,000, and you're right, in terms of the cost, they will dwindle as the project goes on. That 80,000 just represents an average based on, from when we did the original analysis, what we felt a reasonable number was on a monthly basis. If you go back to the beginning, you would have come up with $100,000, and that of course wasn't reasonable at this point in time.
Because I would find it more intellectually satisfying if there's a sloped line and you said, in April, I'll make numbers up, we've still got $20 million worth of construction exposure here, so it's appropriate, I'll make a number up to have 120,000 for month, and by the end of the period, it's going to be 30,000.
You could do
that.
That
I could understand.
Yeah, you could do that, and in the end, we'd still come out around that 800,000. But yes, for presentation purposes, sure, you could try and do it that way based on the monthly totals. Just as a for instance, we've been running between 1.2 and 1.5 million in payments recently. That will go up as we get deeper into police headquarters, because we essentially have 2/3 of the project running at the same time now.
Stuart?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, and I think they're good questions and concerns, but from a PVC standpoint, I think the question that we have grappled with is, how do we position this project to succeed so it's not having to skip and stop and skip and stop? I think the question we may have from the committee standpoint is to you, or maybe even Dave Davidson, is the 1.7 is there. That doesn't mean it's spent. We are trying to provide an ability for this project to finish. So it uses what it needs. We put rigor into the ACL. And again, the ACL log is only what we have vision in today. 3 months from now, 2 months from now, 1 month from now, there could be an item that comes into that ACL log. And to the member's question about how the process works, when an item comes up, it goes into the ACL, it's notified, we review it, we either say yay or nay, but we don't usually say yay. We say, is this something we want to look at and accept? If it is, then it has to go through rigor to get priced down. But I guess the question really becomes, do you really want to pinch this project down into a 1.4, which we're showing at the project balance, not the 1.7, come back in the fall? I guess that's the question the PVC has. We're trying to put forth a position that says, when we started with in the summer and in the fall, is how do we ensure this project team delivers what was expected and not have to be handcuffed, and for the town to realize that it's got a project that has to stop. Again, it's not, I don't think anybody's after, and I understand John Connolly's position in terms of the fear of somebody seeing that money at the sub level and being able to go after it. But I think we've proven over 25 years of PVC and 25 years of running projects, very few projects, if any, come back to the table. So I think there's a lot of due diligence on these project teams. I just put forth the question of, how do you want us to run these projects based on the financial? And I'd prefer to see this project team succeed with a budget that it can work with the due diligence that it provides.
And our committee has to look at things that are beyond this project. We have to look at what that 1.7 million is competing against versus other town needs, and what the pressures are for those funds being tied up in this project as opposed to being used in other places. And that's so we have to look at it beyond your project, and that's what we're doing. And if you devote, I definitely agree with Dick Riley about the 80,000 burn raise. Not the way I would have gone about it. I think it's much too conservative, and coupled with an extra $200,000 upon that, to me, that we're looking at money that we're devoting to this project, and I can understand why you want it. But we're losing it from other places and not be able to apply it in other places. And that's what the competing concern is. And that's why these questions are being asked, because there are other things going on in the town besides your project, as good as it's being run.
Well, it's the town's project, to be quite honest, folks.
And so, no, this project. So that's why, that's where my reservations are. Two questions specifically. Can you tell me a little bit about, like, when I look at the ACL log, this almost $380,000 for temporary facility restoration at Hill. What is that? It's been designed? Is it work that's been bid? Is it quoted? Can you just fill us in on what that is?
Sure. And one thing I might point out before I jump into that, the COVID portion of this money is being reimbursed by either the state or the Fed. We've already got the first 114,000. We can't take it direct because of the way the accounting works. We can't take it directly into the project, so the town gets it, and then via this warrant article would reimburse the project, if you will, for those funds. So we've been reimbursed for April through November last year, and my last conversation with Tatiana in Dave's office was that she's expecting sometime around April, the next round of funding will go in. So it's being reimbursed through FEMA and the CARES Act. So we expect to see most, if not all, of the funds that end up getting expended for COVID to be reimbursed to the town. So getting to your question about Hillside, part of the planning permit for being able to put the temporary facility at Hillside was to restore it to its original condition. Now we're dealing with the planning board, so we don't have to put the bus islands back in and things like that, because it's not going to be a school. But what that entails is all the tent has to be removed, all the construction inside the tent has to be removed. There's rooms in there, there's HVAC systems, there's plumbing, there's electrical panels, there's IT stuff. All that has to come out to get the tent down. Similarly with the 2 sets of trailers, same thing. Sprinklers, work that we've done in there, all that has to be demoed, removed, taken off site. Once that's done, then we have to pave over the area where the trailers are. We have to cut and cap all the utilities below grade, pave those over, fill in the trench drain that's in the tent, remove the fence from around the site, and take out the Zetron stuff that's in the school. We're not doing anything else in the school. We're leaving
That
that
all
as
been, is there an estimate for that? Like a
that is
scope
the
of
estimate.
work?
What you see is the estimate. The scope of work has been developed. What we're working with now is we're working with the trailer folks to try and to tell them, listen, you've got improvements here, the sprinkler systems and some other items. Would you take it back as is, so we don't have to do this selective demolition on it? We're also going to be working with our facilities group, bring them through, say, okay, is there anything here you guys want? Do you want these electrical panels? Do you want the switch gear? Do you want the fan units? Do you want the duct work? Is there anything here that you can use that might have some salvage value and we don't have to pay as much on the demo end? But that number represents a worst case. If we have to completely demo it, rip it all apart and send it back, that represents the worst case.
Then my other question is the consigli contingency. And when I looked at their last requisition, it was about $250,000 that they haven't spent in their CM contingency. What happens to that at the end of the project?
Comes back.
Do we
It
own
comes
it? Do
back-
they own
yes.
it? If
Yeah,
that
it comes
money,
back to us.
Let
Anything-
me finish. So
I'm sorry.
If at the end of the project, that potentially could be money that's available to it comes back to the town, correct?
Yes, along with any holds or allowances that don't.
And they
get
can't
spent.
spend that contingency without you authorizing them to spend it, correct?
Correct.
So that's potentially 250,000 that's available for needs of the project that are going into this risk factor that you're telling us about.
Not really, because that money is that's for their use for things that they may need to do from a buyout standpoint. It doesn't directly transfer in the sense that you're suggesting. That's for them to use internally. I will say, I don't expect that there will be much, if anything, left in that, because they still have winter conditions they have to pay for out of that. And last month they spent $80,000. So
that line item is already below $100,000 currently, as of the last log last week.
I was going off of their last requisition, which is through February 28th.
right, but they've subsequently made contingency transfers in the 3 weeks this month.
Most of that has been in winter conditions.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any other questions? Josh?
I just had a question about the funding source. So however much money is appropriated, this article proposes that it be borrowed. And I was just curious if there was a sense of the Finance Committee, if that's the appropriate mechanism. I know that the whole project was borrowed as part of an override. But I guess I don't see the rationale for why this should be borrowed as well.
I agree. I agree. And I thought exactly the same thing, especially since we don't know whether we do know that some of this is going to be reimbursed. And so while I understand we're not going to borrow for anything that we don't need to borrow for, I think that there may be other ways to fund the overrun rather than through borrowing.
If I could pose this question to Dave, because this is something that we've discussed. As I mentioned earlier, we're spending right now between 1.2 and 1.5 million a month is what we're paying on Consigli's requisition, at least. There are other payments, obviously, to other vendors that under their contract. But this 1.7, let's say, wouldn't need to get paid out until the last 2 months, say, of the project, which would be a year from now. And a lot of things can happen. We may not have expended the $80,000 run rate during that time. So it's, if you're looking versus borrowing versus finding other funding sources, you really wouldn't need to borrow that money until a year from now if that's the route you went. I don't know if that makes a difference, Dave, in the way that you fund the stuff, but it's really what we're looking at is the last month's invoices to be paid with this money.
Dave.
Just as a reminder to the Finance Committee, we don't borrow money up front. We borrow it as the cash flow requires it. That's why there's multiple notes and multiple bonds. So, so there will be a closeout bond once the project is completed, and that's probably going to be in December of 22 or as late as January of 23.
Louise.
So then we wouldn't need bond authorization for the COVID-related expenses, right? Because those would become part of the borrowing and the cash flow expenditures during the course of the project. We would presumably get them back before the end of the project. And if we don't, then at that point in time, I would think we could have a reserve fund transfer to cover the expenses. And when the reimbursement comes in, it would simply go to free cash in whatever fiscal year we're in.
Dave.
Correct about if we receive reimbursements for COVID-related expenses, we would not have to borrow. The issue of the reserve fund, you can't transfer the state law won't allow the reserve fund to be transferred to a capital project. It can only be used to transfer to the operating budgets.
Okay, so let me then, I'll just clarify. So at special town meeting next year, we could have a reserve fund transfer to the project, so we would not need to borrow in the event we have not received funding before the end of the fiscal year when the project ends.
Dave.
Yes,
No?
yes, I misunderstood the question. Yes,
I didn't say it. I didn't say it right.
You can have a supplemental appropriation to close the gap. Correct.
Any other questions?
So Dave, is the anticipated funding for this because you don't anticipate having sufficient free cash?
The anticipated funding was because we were looking to amortize the cost over more than 1 year for the project. And there was nothing other than that purpose.
Somebody else, Dick?
I guess I just don't see any compelling reason to do that at this point in time. We've got time to let the dust settle, if you will, on this and take action when we have better understanding and better knowledge.
I can't, Stuart, you can speak to this, but I can't see how, if we don't have some assurance that we have coverage to continue the project, that we have to entertain adjustments in the way we're running the project. You just can't run by encumbering cost and expect to run.
Yeah, so basically when you looked at that sheet, you've got an encumbered of 7384. You only have $299 to use. That's the challenge. And based on the project team and the way the finances work, the way we understand it, you basically have nothing to run on. at a certain
You
point.
have
in time.
nothing to run on for changes.
Correct.
You
Nothing-
can run the project, you just can't run any changes.
Right, and you may very well find conditions that you have to address, and that would stop it.
But how many months do we have? Did I understand this project is going to go on for like 14 to 16 months?
No, 10 months. Next January, February, early part of February is when everything opens up.
But then we
Police
will
headquarters is
we
last
will
year.
have the restoration at Hillside after that.
But in terms of the 3 buildings, Ken, correct? So police headquarters, the last bit would be the early part of
Yeah,
February.
we're looking at early November right now for Fire Station 2 and early January for police headquarters.
So, I mean, you must have money to get from here until then, right?
For only for the original contract work.
I got it. I got it. But I mean, the money is there. You're not, you say there's $293 left, which is more than I have in my bank account, but you say that's all you've got, but that's based on an expected spend rate. So the point is, I think what John is saying, which I think makes sense, why can't we revisit this? We don't want to cut you short. We don't want to not be able to finish the project. But why is it that we need to do it now when we still have a number of months?
All the items that are in the
The
ACL we
ACL.
would not be able to do, some of which would prevent us from completing the project.
Well, okay, I've got your view. By the way, I just want to say before we go, Madam Chair, that I'm honored that I see my old pal Steve Popper here. He's a great person who's done wonderful service for the town. So I just want to say, Stephen, it's good to see you.
Jim, it's also good to see you.
I have no other comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, so where I come from is I understand the need that there should be an appropriation and an add to it a budget. I just have a real issue with the 1.7 amount. Because when you break it down, you start at 200,000 of that is just sort of adding above the 1.4 anyway. Then when you break down further, that 1.4 has a burn rate in it that I don't think is, at least I think it's way too high considering where we are in the project and what's left to be done. And then when you break it down even further, you see that I'm going to use the number 400,000 for Hillside that we're not going to get to. We don't know what that's going to be or what we have to do on that yet. And so that's an expenditure that's out over a year. And there's $176,000 for COVID costs that we're going to get reimbursed for within this year. That's being carried within the 600 ACL number. So when you break it down from the 1.7, I think the number should be somewhere between around $750,000 to $1 million. At the highest amount would be the amount that would be appropriate to go forward with as an extra appropriation at this time. I don't think the 1.7 number is the one that I would recommend.
Well, as the project moves forward, John, we're going to continue to see the need for changes, as you call it. Changes continue to fall into categories which we discussed. Either errors or omissions on the design plans that have to be paid and approved as change orders. Adjustments in scope that weren't seen when the original drawings were issued, and differing conditions. And I'll grant you that differing conditions is probably, at this point, being out of the ground, is probably falling off to near zero. But those other 2 areas, in my opinion, are necessary to deliver a complete project to the town.
Well, we've bought a complete project. It would be delivering a complete project plus some other things to the town.
No, that's incorrect, John. I think you know very well that the normal process is that adjustments are made as the project evolves because of errors and omissions in the design documents.
And so why should we be paying for that?
Because that is the normal process by which we've operated well from the start, from the time you've been chair of this committee. We own that responsibility. We've selected the architect, and we don't pass those conditions for the most part. We have on occasion gone back to the architect and have asked him to pick up costs where we felt the design was deficient in a way that wasn't customarily part of the normal design development of the project. Those errors and omissions are picked up by the town or by the owner because we have selected the architect. Our position is we've selected the architect. We own his product, his efficiency. And it's normal. I haven't seen a project go through that doesn't have errors and omissions in it. And I haven't seen those errors and omissions, except for unusual conditions, not being picked up by the owner, which in this case is the town.
Let me ask, can I ask one quick question? Is there any reason why the Hillside portion of this can't be totally separated out and addressed at a later date?
We would like that, but I think as Ken said, the planning board owns the permit. They won't close the permit out. So you've got some challenges there. And that's why we're trying to mitigate that risk of the 380 and see if we can bring that down. What is considered the conditions? We can reduce that down, sure.
Barry, the other thing we need to consider is the tent and the trailers up there are rented. And that's part of Consigli's contract. So if we run into a hang up with the planning board and are unable to pull that stuff out of there, then it's going to cost the town, the trailers are, the tent is like 14 grand a month. I don't remember exactly what the trailers are, but you're looking at 20 to 25,000 a month. Every extra month we have that stuff up there.
The planning board can't require us to keep the trailers. They can just say they're not going to close out on their permit until it's restored to the manner in which they contemplated when they issued the special permit. You can get your C of O for the project for all three buildings without Hillside being addressed.
Oh,
that goes to Barry's point.
Absolutely.
Correct. But
And I think that goes to Barry's point, that we can deal with Hillside in a different way at a later date. And it doesn't need to be part of this.
Well, we cannot remove the trailers or the tent, and particularly either one actually, until we do the selective demolition that's required to allow that removal.
Is there anyone that really wants to return Hillside to an existing condition?
No.
Jesus, I mean, come on. All right, it's
That-
getting
that's-
late.
Yeah.
That's what we're driving towards in working with planning, but the permit, unfortunately, that's what it says.
Well, we've had to make alterations to that site in order to fit those trailers and the apparatus tent in place. And at least we're somewhat committed to returning that area to a parking area, to a blacktopped area. That's what we're working with planning, but because at this point in time, we're not sure what how planning wants to address that. But what we're looking at is the minimum condition of turning that area into a blacktop surface.
Well, Steve, I know this, listen, you know this much better than I do, but I hope that more sane minds would say, we don't even know what we're going to do with Hillside. I wouldn't put a dime into that. You may have to get rid of tents. You may have to get rid of the other units, but I wouldn't put blacktop. I wouldn't put seed. I wouldn't put trees. I wouldn't do anything because I don't think the town has yet figured out what they're going to do with that site. I know it's not your call or Stuart's call, but I'm hoping that we'll have further discussions about maybe we just leave that kind of in a au naturel for now until we know what the town really thinks they might want to do with the site. But maybe that's too much sense.
Well, that's what we're hoping, quite honestly, is that there's a reasonable, because there's the number of projects that are ahead or needs of the town that why put money into something and then have put money in to change it again? I think we all agree. Our concern is the behavior and the trends that have happened over the years. There's not a guarantee of reasonableness that I think you're implying.
Well, we'll do you a favor by squeezing you in this, and then you'll have to do something.
I mean, we're all squeezing ourselves from a town funding perspective, but I'm just saying it. The other boards can put some, what they did at DPW in terms of some things that we shouldn't have had to bore on the project, but that's why the PVC reached out to various parties and said, we cannot incorporate the scope of the change of the island, the DPW. Same thing with Hillside. Anyways, the long short of it is, it would be nice to have some reasonable consideration for the long term of the town and not have to spend those funds.
Okay, anything else on this? Nope. Stuart, Ken, Steve.
Nope, I just appreciate the time and if there's other questions, we're happy to answer.
Great.
Okay, we all set?
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was fun.
Well beyond my bedtime. Andy and Maybury is already over, so I don't know.
So we do have one other topic, just to introduce it, is Josh and I really wanted to talk about kind of all the capital projects in town that are before us and how we communicate, how we communicate to the planning board, to the select board, to the town manager, how we prioritize those projects and how we finance them. So we had a chair's discussion a few days ago, and Dave, I know you're working on a financing plan for those projects sometime in April. But I think we really need to start the discussion amongst ourselves and developing a view as to how we prioritize those. So I just wanted to open that up for discussion.
And Carol, I would just add that I think the superintendent in that meeting was clear that he would like to know sooner rather than later if there's hesitancy about moving forward with Emory Grover. So that's why I suggested that maybe we discuss it tonight so that we can hopefully provide some clarity.
I think there's hesitancy.
I don't know though, Josh, that we can provide clarity until there's as I think we all said, a more comprehensive analysis and plan of Emory Grover, where should town administration go? What are we ultimately doing with Hillside, and how to prioritize those things? It seems that there's a real hesitancy on the part of the school committee and the PBC on doing any type of short-term 5 years like leasing for school administration. We have never really seen that analysis.
Is that something that we want to pursue? I mean, I don't know exactly how we would do that, but just push the ball forward. If I think the benefits of a short-term rental is that it, well, there are a couple of benefits, I guess. The town does have, I guess, the Stephen Palmer building, which will be available in a couple of years. So a short-term
2027, I think.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, exactly. So
you're gonna have
a
the
rental-
same issue with. I'm sorry, Josh. You're gonna have the
Yeah.
same issue with Stephen Palmer in the sense that you'd be constructing a new facility there. It's just a different location for. And I'm not necessarily in disagreement. You know, I think one of the things, unfortunately, that we haven't heard from the school department is, my guess is there's certain elements of admin that frankly don't ever have to go back into a building and be all together anymore. I mean, I think with the way everybody's been operating, you know, I think the project, the original plan was obviously conceived pre-COVID with the assumption that everything was going to go back to the way it was, doing things the way we had done it before. And I'm not sure it's a bad idea to think a little bit outside the box. You know, maybe they don't need 30,000 square feet of space for everybody to be in one building, you know, optimally located in the center of everything. You know, maybe the critical functions take up half that space, and they can be, you know, we can do something on an interim basis until these things, you know, see what other opportunities come about, or you know, where, you know,
Or Hillside is vacated, you know.
You know, Hillside was an option as part
You
of
don't
the
pave
plan.
it.
You know, but again, to construct something new at Hillside was you know, clearly an option in the plan that actually a lot of people were in favor of as part of the working group. But you know, for whatever
But they
reason,
never examined the cost of that, did they?
yeah, no. If you go back to the original study that was done, it was before. Yeah, that was one of the options that was presented. I can't remember. Again, the delta between the highest and the lowest was within 10 to 20%. It wasn't huge.
But isn't that what we need? I mean, I haven't mentioned it to this group, but I've mentioned it in a prior life, that we did in 1998, Castle Booze came up and did the first comprehensive townwide facility study committee. John was on PBBC at the time. I was on the FinCom at the time. And then we moved forward and we did the first iteration of projects from 2000 all the way up until about 2010 or so. And we did the high school, we did Elliott, we did Broadmeadow, we did DPW down at on Dedham Avenue, and I'm probably forgetting one or two others. Then we went to phase two. Phase two was, we did the senior center and we did Memorial Park. Oh, I'm sorry, the library was in the other iteration. But we did, you know, the phase two of the, Hillside, I'm not Hillside, High Rock. But we did this all in concert with a plan. And so now it seems to me we're on phase three. Phase three is, how do we then finish off the rest of the town buildings? Because all the rest of them have been done. I don't think there's a building, I said the other day, I don't think there's a building older in the town than Mitchell and Emory Grover. I think everything else has been done literally from 2000 forward. Not one of our buildings, I don't think, is older than 20 years old.
Pollard is.
Pardon me?
Pollard is.
Well, but Pollard has had 16 renovations over a period of that 20 years. But you're right, Paula needs to be part of the next. But I think that's what needs to be done.
Well,
We
part of the
need-
school master plan is just that, because it really is the school buildings. The three main buildings being Emory, Grover, Pollard, and Mitchell. And figuring out how much, I mean, that process has started, and we've gotten estimates for each of those, and it's figuring out what should be the priority and in what timing to mitigate, or smooth out, I guess, the debt costs over an appropriate period of time. And that's the schedule I assume, Dave, you're working on.
But I do think that, and that's what Barry you're talking to, that's what John's spoken to. I think that's the next thing. And it's not just the cost, but it's where.
Right.
It's where.
I mean, what hasn't been vetted well, certainly town, in a town-wide setting, is it's clear we need, Pollard and Mitchell. We need to have schools there, and there's really only a couple of options. If we choose to build a new building in a different location, there really aren't options. I mean, school administration, though, doesn't necessarily have to be where it is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in an owned building, in my opinion. And I don't think it's been, thoroughly discussed or vetted, or, if you ask the school committee, school department, of course they want to be where they were, in the center of town. But again, I'm not sure given the priorities that we have elsewhere and the limitations on how much we can borrow, whether that we should think about it differently.
Yeah, I think that needs to be re-examined. I agree with you.
But you're only going to know that until you have, a plan. Until you know what the borrowing limits are, what the capacities are within the 10%, within the 3%.
No, clearly, if you tell the school department, well, you know what, if we're going to go forward with Emory Grover, then you can't get a new Mitchell till 2035, for example. They may look at it differently. I don't know if that's the answer, but I think everybody thinks that we can just do everything when we want to do it.
And what John says, it's not just about them.
Right.
Well, it's not.
Well, it's interesting. Barry raises a very good point, because I do think things are different. And COVID's going to teach us a lot. There are roughly, I'm going to get this wrong, plus or minus, but I think there's about 35 people that work in school administration. And I don't know if it seems to make sense to spend $27 million for offices for 35 people anywhere. So I think it behooves a decent conversation. When Dan was with us, I don't know, a couple months ago, we talked about this, and I raised the COVID issue to him. His response was, at the time, that all of their work is done face-to-face with potential parents and all of that, and the thought of remoteness, both technologically and physically, seemed to be far beyond at least his original thinking there. But I think because they were all focused on Emory, to their credit, to be in a nice, restored, historical place. But it seems to me it warrants a much, much larger conversation besides just the money piece. But to Josh's point earlier, how do we engage in that conversation?
Yeah, how do we get that to happen?
And how do we do it in a relatively informal way, just to throw it around to get the conversation going? Because it really isn't we and them. It's got to be us. Right?
I just want to agree with what you guys are saying, particularly with the office space. If school administration office spaces, every company is right now trying to figure out what their offices are going to look like over the next 12 to 36 months. And they don't know how much office space they're going to need, how much is going to be work from home. And if you couple that uncertainty with the fact that Mitchell is really in desperate need to be done, I think, ahead of school administration. And I know school administration is not a comfortable workspace, but between the two, I'd much rather put Mitchell in front of the school administration, particularly in light of the fact that we don't know what office space needs are really going to be in the near future. So I just agree.
Plus my other pet peeve is that we're going to spend $27 million for a single source building, such as senior center, such as parlor, such as swimming pool. Now we're going to do it exactly the same. Seems to me that we need to get more creative on how we utilize space beyond the single utilization.
Okay, I think I've heard you say that once or twice.
I can hear me say it a lot more.
John, did you
So
have?
might I suggest that I think the approach would be, one, I think we have to be clear that the Emory Grover article is premature at this time and that we would not be supporting it, to get that out and get it said. And then two, to invite the schools and the select board and us three groups to find a time to have a meeting, you know, whether we do it on a Saturday. I'm not saying when it should be, but I think all three groups should be together to hear one another out and to start the dialogue collectively and start working towards a collective process that we can go towards, would be what my recommendation would be.
In addition to that, I think we need to be in a position to offer solutions. So I think what we want to get out of that joint meeting is a clear prioritization of which buildings need to be done first. And I think I don't want it to look like we're just saying no to Emory Grover without offering any alternatives.
No, well, but we're saying no to get the point across that this can't be done in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And that's the only point of it. Not that we don't want to do these things, or not that we don't want to have this dialogue or any of those types of things, but it's to make clear that something like this can't be done in a vacuum. It has to be part of a collective discussion and process and sort of
plan.
And plan, right, and plan.
That's exactly right.
And by the way, if they really, if they want to, if they come out and say, look, you know, Emory Grover is our top priority, you know, we need to address this first. The implications of that are they're going to be talking to the Pollard parents and the Mitchell parents to say, guess what? You guys are back of the line again. And who knows, you know, realistically, when we're going to be in a position to start that process. And that, if that's what they're willing to, the message they want to send, you know, that's fine, but that's how they have to, you have to make sure that that's what they're.
But it's not a message we have to accept, Barry. That's the point I'm trying to make. I mean, I understand everyone needs input, but their input is no more valuable than anyone else's.
Fair enough, but I don't think they're thinking along those lines that.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem. They need to be part of a comprehensive plan, which the town has done. As I've tried to say, this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, this can be done.
Jim, they presented a plan for the schools. It had us spending $250 million over the next 4 years.
That was their plan. That was not a town plan.
That's my point.
Doesn't the plan, don't we need to provide a budget of what we're willing to accept, so that if we have three big school buildings, and as Barry said, if we said we do this now, then Mitchell doesn't start till 2035, and something that say, listen, you can have all you want, but this is as much as we're going to spend year to year to try to keep the tax burden manageable. It's already pretty high for a lot of people.
The good news is Dave has all the answers.
Well, that's why we have Dave.
But it's not just of whether or not, you know, they choose to spend it on X today and not Y tomorrow. The expenditure on what Emory Grover has to make sense as well.
Right.
It has to be both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's something that Rick said that I think sent a light off in my head. Are we going at this the wrong way? I don't know whether you said, I'll make a number up, 26 people, whatever it is. And we're talking about the building rather than, if we went at it the other way, say, how many people are in the school administrative function and what are the space needs for them? you may come up with a very different number than redoing the Emory Grover.
No, well, they did that actually. I mean, it's part of the original process. They came up with, I forget, 30,000 square feet of space that they felt they needed for what they do. You know, and this again is all pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Every
But part of
company,
that too, Barry, was
It's interesting.
community
when you
meetings
look at
and
the building-
parent meetings.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's interesting, that Barry, when you look at the building, you know, the third floor of that building, the fourth floor of that building is condemned. No one, your Jim, no one goes up there. And there's a couple departments in the basement, and there's Dan and some of his folks on the middle floor. Then upstairs is transportation and a couple other, but I'm curious how they're going to spend all that 30,000 square feet, given the departments they have, utilizing that building as they have it. That's, you know, when I saw the plan in terms of the build out in the back, that, you know, an additional 20,000 square feet, I thought to myself, like, it's great they're getting people out of the basement. That's wonderful. But like, what are they going to do with the rest of the 27 million?
every company that pays multiple millions of dollars of rent is going through the exercise that was mentioned earlier as to what are the space needs, what will be the remote workforce needs, what are the new IT needs, because to have IT data centers right now is a small fraction of what it used to be even 10 years ago. Every company's doing that. So it's not illogical to me that we should expect the same of our office people. And I would say what we don't want to do is we don't want students to be remote. So we want students to be able to go to the school. I think the socialization, the direct person-to-person learning is critical. So we're not going to do that for Mitchell. We're not going to do that for Pollard or any other schools. But would we consider doing it for the administration? I think the answer is absolutely we'd consider it.
Or at least you could have a distributed workforce. You know, you could distribute that workforce probably within some of our existing town buildings now. And we've never looked at that either. And I think that needs to be looked at. So how do we move this forward? So we set up a meeting with all three of our.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of cumbersome, to be quite honest with you.
I think John's point was pretty valid. A strong message from the Finance Committee that we are opposed to what we've heard so far. And based on all we've heard so far is you would not get our endorsement at town meeting.
I agree, Dick, but I also think I don't think there should be this, 25-person committee. I think there should be a little bit of a task force. You pick a couple people from the select board, couple people from school committee, administration, FinCom, and we task them with the job of coming up with phase 3 of the reconstruction of Needham. That's what I would do.
Oh, and they have that school master plan, so that's really the start to.
I know, but I just don't think that's a plan that's ever been endorsed by the select board, by the finance committee.
It isn't. No, it was just done.
It was just done.
It was literally just done. It hasn't really been vetted by anybody.
So to me, I wouldn't want to,
Jim, can we start smaller, maybe as opposed to boiling the ocean, given the fact that we seem to be really questioning the wisdom of Emory? Could we start there with your conversation and kind of see where that goes relative to that building? It's certainly going to cause the parties to think about what's in the periphery, but at least initially, it's over this one particular article in this one particular issue, which is small enough to bite into with some meaning. I'm just thinking if we ask the parties to come together and talk about this plan, all that's going to do is have everybody dig their heels in and give justification of what they planned already, which I think is counterproductive to what you're suggesting. So maybe as opposed to scaring everyone by boiling the ocean, we start a little small.
You might be right. You might be right. All I can tell you is that it worked before. It worked in phase one. It worked in phase two. Look at all we've done. I mean, it's rather remarkable. And so I do think it can work again. I think phase three can work. But, you know, it's going to take a willingness on everyone's, you know, all the stakeholders to come and get, you know, cast aside all of their previously conceived notions about what they want and don't want. It's going to take Dave to give us the numbers and to show, well, you can't do this, or if you want to do this, it's 20 years down the road, as Barry said. So I don't have a problem with just looking at Emory Grover. It's just that I think if we really want to make progress, we have to look at this from, you know, what's left. I just think that's the way to go.
I don't disagree, except I think we'll go on forever and not really talk about anything of substance. I think the hard stuff is left. You know, some of the easier stuff in phase one and phase two, people got together, okay, but I think now we're down to the hard stuff. And I think—
Well, is this the, you had a chairs meeting a little while ago. Is this some feedback to give back at another chairs meeting, and people can sort of come up with a game plan on how we get to, as Jim calls it, organizing phase three?
I kind of liked Dick's suggestion of like a letter of just the sense of our committee to the school committee and the select board. I mean, I think we should have like a meeting, whether it's a chairs meeting or some sort of working group, but maybe a letter would just put it in writing. It would make it concrete.
I'm okay with anything that moves it forward.
Yeah, I think some kind of communication is needed, but if we approach them and say we're having some real problems here, I'm just curious, is that gonna have them dig their heels in and begin to justify all their stuff? Is there a less threatening way to knock on their door and say, hey, well, let's talk about this stuff? I'm not sure. All I know is they're pretty set and have their plan that they've had for a while.
They can opt to move forward with the plan without our recommendation and see what happens too.
Dave Davison lost his lights.
Dave's done.
They turned you off.
They're trying to kick me out, I think.
Gotta pay the bills there.
You're finally in the dock.
Oh, my. What happened? Do you know?
I think at 10 o'clock the lights go
The
off.
lights probably go off.
Timer shut off the lights.
And doing it a little early tonight.
Dave, can't you wave your arms? Don't they come on automatically?
So I'm not so sure we need something as formal as a letter. I kind of agree with, I think we need to communicate, though, even if it's just the school liaisons communicating to Dan and the school committee, this is what we can't go forward on Emory Grover.
Or that we're not
We're not
in agreement to go forward. I mean, whether they choose to go forward without us on board is, you know, it's an option they obviously have, but not one that they probably would be willing to take.
So do you think that would be a good first step?
But I think it has to be done quickly because I think town meeting, I mean, we have the Emory Grover design funds at town meeting, and I think we want to be in a position where we've already discussed with the school committee before then.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know where we are with our financing plan right now, but we basically can't afford any of this stuff. Like, that's just the bottom line.
That's the point.
Right. So I think we need to figure out what is it that we can afford.
And we've had fights before, you know. Don't you remember that?
That's not a big deal.
That's what I'm saying. Don't you remember the town hall? I mean, oh my God. Do we build the Powers Hall or do we not build the Powers Hall? You know, do we give $4.2 million more to restore it? You know, what do we do with, do we give more money to Pollard? Do we put more modulars in? Do we put a campus right on the ball field down there? I mean, these things, we've been battling back and forth on all these construction items for years and years and years, but we do get to a place. We get to a place. I just think that if we start this process, we will get to a place. But I think it needs to be a very, holistic global view. But that's just.
I think to Louise's point, I mean, our responsibility is we don't necessarily decide the priorities of which ones come first. We can certainly have our input, but what we can afford is sort of our responsibility. And I think we sort of, and I'm not sure how to accomplish this, but don't we need to lay out what we can afford over the next 20 years, whatever the time frame might be, and then say, this is what we can afford. How can we get all those other priorities in an order that works?
Tom, if we're willing to do overrides, we can afford anything.
Well,
But that is
yes.
actually, but that's
No,
actually.
you can't. You can't.
But I think,
Yeah.
I think we all agree that is,
No, but you can't anywhere.
I know the
You
ceiling is
have limits.
unlimited.
Yes, there is a ceiling to what you
We
can
have a
borrow.
10% cap. Now, we've gone over the 10% cap on rare occasions, but only with the understanding that after 3 or 4 years, we'd come back under the cap.
But
So, we do have debt management policies. At least last time I knew. Do we still have them?
we do.
Dave, this
Okay.
is what you are working on a plan to do just that. Is that correct?
I am going to show the impact of the projects and the impact it would have on items such as the 10%,
Right.
what is feasible within the 3%. That's correct. That's what I'm going to be showing.
So
But-
Are you going to show placeholders?
But it's always been our job, though, to then say, now this is what we recommend that we do or be limited to. Because
But are you going to show placeholders, Dave?
he has to.
Yeah, he has to. He has to make
The
assumptions.
answer is yes, because there are other projects, Public Works, for instance, that still hasn't been addressed. And there is a capital request to look at doing a refresh at Elliott in Broadmeadow. Now that it's been
Great,
coming up
20
on
years
20
old.
years.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Mitchell's
And then
1954.
We'll be
but that's
next.
all right.
And High Rock, and we go all around again. So at that point, I'm retiring because I'm not doing the same projects twice.
John Conley was the one that put Broadmeadow and Elliott
Yeah.
through in
John was
2000.
on PPVC.
First of all, Louise's line, she'll be here.
And I
until
went to school at
forever.
Broadmeadow.
Oh my God.
I went to Mitchell and I still have the gum stuck under the seat I used to have.
2021. We're in
All right.
2021, Jim.
So I think we have to wait for Dave's report. Then we have to look at the report and figure out how we want to adjust it and say, no, we want you to move this to 5 years later or whatever we decide.
And I think that's fine, but we do need to communicate that we are not on board.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm pretty sure it's being heard right now, but
And
yes,
revoked.
I mean, a conversation with chairs, I guess, is just one way to start, to say, we'd like to see the big picture, because that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, but I think it heads up to Dan and the school board is highly
fair.
appropriate.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, when they review the recording of this meeting, everybody will know our feeling.
Yeah.
Well,
So
there's some
maybe
people
John
listening
and Barry,
they're
do you
listening.
think, there's a time that we can just meet with Dan and the school committee?
I mean, I'm relatively flexible, so.
Does that make sense?
Yep, I'll do whatever you guys need.
Okay. So maybe Louise, we can reach out to Dan and,
Yeah, I'll let him know.
Yeah, we're gonna need to do that, Carl, because I don't think our next scheduled liaisons
That's
meeting
too
is
late.
till the end of April.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
want to
we'll
try
do
to
that.
do this sometime next week if possible.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let him know.
I did notice Ann is in the wait.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, like I said, I think it's being heard, but it's appropriate to have a conversation.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I think we're done for this evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
I.
Roll call.
Roll call vote. Yes for me. Rick?
Yes.
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Tom,
Twice.
Yes.
Barry,
Yeah.
John,
Yes, please.
Jim,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Josh.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Hey.
All right.